We're filming today in Manhattan for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. It's my pleasure to be speaking with Toshiko Akiyoshi, who is a renowned band leader.
I don't say that.
I think so.
Thank you.
Pianist and composer. And I'll make a quote from the All Music Guide to Jazz that called you one of the top arrangers of the last 25 years. Can I suspect that you might have preferred that they call you a composer?
I think probably because my case is both is the same. I don't really, as a rule, I don't arrange somebody else's music. I have done a few number of blues composition. I done two, to the exception, one Dizzy Gillespie one. And another one, Frank West, was with the band for 10 years. It was my gift to him, one of his tunes. Other than that, I don't do that. So
that's an interesting scenario to write an arrangement for someone who's a great arranger themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes, to me, as an arranger, is something you look at a piece and you look at different aspect of that particular tune. Perhaps not writer itself didn't think about that when he or she has written that particular piece of music. No, I think that makes arranger interesting. I think looking at a different way. Like old days about the famous story about the four, I think it was a four blind person, and they describing a elephant, and four of them touch the different part of elephant, and then they say, oh, elephant is like a pole, or elephant is like a, or it's like a long hose, or whatever.
Oh,
I think that's probably it.
It's an interesting way to say it. Yeah, it's a good analogy. I understand you were born in China.
Yes.
And you moved to Japan at, you were about 17, is that right?
I was 15, going 16, yes.
Can I ask why your family moved? And that
War was
particular,
ended.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, that was a very you know, important time for both those countries.
Yes. I think I was lucky the fact I was very little. I think my parents, it was such a terrible blow, especially for my father, because he was almost, he built his business in China. That's why he wanted to remain. That's why he wanted to finish his life. Then the war was ended, and then lost everything, and it was something that he totally didn't expect. So I think it was very difficult for them. You know.
What was his business?
Oh, export, import. He was sent to China, those days called Manchuria, by biggest company, textile company, Japanese textile company, and they made a big plant in a place called Rowe. So that's how my parents went. And after that, he left and started his own business. I think, but one thing about when you're very young, you can endure a lot, I think, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been quite a culture shock to...
What respect?
Well, China and Japan, my history's not great, but they've had a checkered history over the years. Was it difficult to go from one to the other?
No, because we all did what they call, they have a Japanese school. The Japanese community is quite different from Chinese community. We were in a Japanese community. You know, funny thing about 3 years ago, I was back in China. Now they call Liaoning province, old Manchuria. And I visited my own, where I was born, where I went to school. And I didn't realize till then, this was done by NHK. And we had a separate community. You know, when I was too little to realize that, my father's right arm man was a Chinese, and we visited the home, and he used to visit us our home frequently. And I never realized that we were, indeed, it was a separate community. I think so. The school we went, and I never thought about them, but there wasn't any Chinese, maybe one or two pupil, but all the Japanese. So all the Japanese education and everything, the all teacher came from mainland Japan.
I see.
So, it was nothing about that. Also, but we had Chinese language mandatory class started third year, I think it was the third year. So that was mandatory. So we had to learn Chinese. It's a very difficult language.
I've been told that. That it's one of the hardest. What was your exposure to music before you moved to Japan?
Japanese. I don't mean Japanese. I think it was from a Meiji Restoration time, which is perhaps, 120 or so years ago, when Japan adopted Western culture. The school system came from England. The culture both came from France. And so everything was, education was in a Western style.
Oh.
So we, for music, we never learned the Japanese music, but it was all Western music.
That's really interesting.
So I wish they had others too,
Yeah.
But for example, my second sister studied Japanese traditional performing art, dancing and sort of, but that was after school and your own, so to speak. So
When you moved to Japan, had you started on an instrument before then?
I started play piano third grade when I was 7 years old, and the reason was when I was 7, there's a 9-year-old girl played Mozart Turkish March, the sonatas and third movement, and I really thought I'd like to play just like that. So I asked my parents if I can take a lesson because we had a piano, and that started. And I really loved the instrument. I think that's really my instrument. Kind of, so to speak, when you play, I feel very happy.
Was there a pretty strong United States presence in Japan
After the war.
after the war?
Yeah.
Is that how you heard jazz?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, after war was ended, during the war, Japan was a strictly prohibited dance hall. There was before the war, there was a dance hall, I understand. I was too little to know about that, but during the war, there was anything like that. They were all no for the country. So after the World War II, all of a sudden there's a dance hall. And American, as you know, those, they are sort of like classified officers club, NCO club, what have you. And those days even, it's not I think unwritten law. I'm not quite sure. I don't think official, but there was a black people, they have their black soldiers dance hall,
Yeah.
And then of course the Japanese wanted to dance too. So there's so many dance halls, and musicians wasn't that many musicians in Japan. So anybody who can play a little bit, they were immediately
Lots of gigs.
hired.
Wow.
So I really wanted to touch piano, and then others, you can imagine, my parents lost everything. They could not buy a piano for me. So I took a job in dance hall. And I think it was lucky for me, it was for the Japanese people. And one of the Japanese young men, it's not young anymore now. I see him every once in a while. His name was Mr. Fukui. And he was a jazz record collector.
Oh.
And somehow he thought I have potentiality.
Yeah.
So he invited me over to his home and played the Teddy Wilson record. That's a kind of famous story.
Yeah, yeah.
And he played the Teddy Wilson Sweet Lorraine. And I thought, I want to play just like that. That's my first introduction.
Great.
But I was in 1947, I believe.
Mhm.
Yes.
So you went from wanting to play just like Mozart, or just like that, to just like Teddy Wilson.
Yeah.
Well, that's good company, you know. That's, you can do a lot
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
When was the first time that you might have had to deal with chord symbols or just a lead sheet as opposed to a written score?
When I got the job. Yes, I go to, as I said, it was the manager asked me, I saw this pianist wanted. So I go inside, the manager came out and he said, can you play piano? I said, yes. He said, well, you come in 7 o'clock night. It could be 6 o'clock, it was early. And so I go there and then I see 5 people. The band leader was an ex-Navy officer who played the violin. And there was a great violin and accordion and drums and a piano and alto saxophone, no bass. And that's the first time I see chord symbol. And I never seen them before, so I said, what is this? He said, you don't know anything. I said, no, I don't. He said, well, let me play the piano. So I said, well, so I played the Sonata, Beethoven Sonata number 3. Da, 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 da. And she said, oh, she can play piano. So she said, well, just do what you think you can do, and it's your ear. I teach you how to read the chord symbol next day. That's what it was. And I really thought that was, the jazz, and that was American. It's nothing but the noisy, and I really didn't like it. But I had access to piano in an afternoon. So that was my, the wonderful time, daytime I can just play piano, because it's dance hall only open in evening. So it's from first day, yes.
So then this person would show you what major 7 meant and,
Yes,
and all those kinds
yes.
of things. And
Yeah, but I think probably he wasn't very well informed either. I mean, when I got, when you look back. But those days, I thought everybody sounded better than myself. So everybody, when they suggested me to do something, I did it.
you sort it out later.
Yes,
once
exactly.
You started to,
Yeah.
yeah. So Teddy Wilson, now I think I had read that you had a chance meeting or encounter with Oscar Peterson.
Yes.
And
But the first great pianist I have actually met in person was Oscar Peterson. That was in 1953, I believe. That's the first time the American jazz group came to Japan for Japanese audience. Before that, there were a few groups came to Japan, but they were for USL tour for the American troupe. For example, Louis Armstrong was there one time, and Gene Krupa Trio was there one time, and way before that, 1950, I believe, there was a dance band, Les Brown's band with Bob Hope. But more than anything, I think 51, I'm not quite sure, there's Oscar Pettiford, the leader, and J.J. Johnson, Howard McGee. They were also USO tour. And Charlie Rice, drummer, I forgot the name of the guitar player. They didn't have a pianist because it's a USO tour. As you know, piano is not always there. So they don't usually have a pianist. So that was the guitar, Charlie Rice. And Rudy Williams used to be with the Lionel Hampton tenor player, play and dance and lie down on the floor.
oh yeah, the whole show.
The whole show, yes. Oh, that was very exciting to me. Actually, they played in Ernie Pyle Theater. Those days after the war, to the occupation time, many American organizations, let's say a headquarters for this, theater, they took over Japanese public building. So this theater belongs to Japanese performing group, a very famous called Takarazuka, all girls. And they took that theater, they made it Anipile Theater, and that's where they came. And Japanese are not supposed to be there, off limits to Japanese. So vice versa, Americans are off limits to Japanese club. And so I already had a big, what I call, it's called like a groupie.
Oh, yeah.
I had American groupies.
Oh.
So one of the person was Air Force. We used to call Mac. I don't think his real name is Harry McCutcheon, I think. But Mac was called. He actually invited me to listen to the group combo. And then I knew if I went there, I'm going to be late for my work.
Oh.
But I just couldn't help it. So I was late for work. And my band leader, in the group, it was a sextet. A tenor player was the leader, and he was steaming mad. But they came, JJ and Howard Maggie, and they came with me to club. So that sort of made him a little bit cool.
Okay.
That was very exciting. Never heard. And that's the first time I heard someone actually warm up. JJ would say, Mark would introduce me to JJ, and he came up and said, excuse me, I have to warm up, and he played a long tone. I never heard that before.
Oh.
No, before that. I was with a big band. Prior to that, maybe 2, 3 different big bands. But I never heard Japanese player doing that. So that was very impressive to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something as simple as that concept of,
yes.
of preparing for your
Yes,
performance.
yes.
Yeah.
Very.
How did your father feel about your continued involvement in music?
Well, first he was very, very upset because, Japanese traditionally middle-class family owned. Daughters are not supposed to work till they got married to someone. So, and top of that, the dance, oh my God, that's an evil place. So, but I was paid 1,000 yen, which is a tremendous money those days. And it was very helpful for the family. And top of that, my mother sort of talked him into it. Actually, this was in a fall of '46. And I was supposed to go to medical school. And the school in Japan starts springtime. So it's not like September, So my mother said, well, till she starts school. So that cooled my father. Then by the time that came, they got, well, she didn't come juvenile delinquent or anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was that.
It's interesting. When did it first come up that you might actually come to the States to study?
Those days, there's a couple ways to learn new music, and then also the language. To, as I said, the record. I used to copy record one at a time, and unfortunately, later on, I was hired in a band which was playing Officers Club. And the daytime is, of course, no one there. And they have one of those record player. It had those days called V-disc.
V-discs.
Yes, it's kind of like 12 inches, I think. And I could play, and I could listen, and then I could copy that. It doesn't matter whether saxophone player solo or something. I just copy everything. And that's the way you learn how idiosyncrasy of like improvisation languages. Then later, when I went to Tokyo, this was on the Kyushu Island, and then start getting a jazz coffee shop where you can have a cup of coffee, and myself, for example, stay for about 2-3 hours and I try to learn some tunes, because that was the only way. There was nothing, thousand timpan ale music or something like that. There was nothing about the books or anything.
Oh, no fake books.
So no, nothing. So you learn that way. And as another very precious lesson is that those days were drafted musician from here, professional one. Some was noted, like Hampton Halls, for example. It's a noted player. Even not that noted, Eddie Costa. There was a Don Prell. Later, he was playing with LA's group, Bachank or somebody like that. But anyway, there were quite many good players in Japan, and army band. Some was not a Navy band, but the Air Force's band. And they would come and sitting in where I had my own group. And I learned some tunes that way. I remember there was a Barney Benton. Later he was a short time he was with Max Roach's group. He lived in, but he didn't like New York, so I think he quit. And that was quite some time ago. But that time, when I said, this was somewhere like in 1954. So after I had this chance making record for Norman Granz, which was a 53, Oscar Peterson recommended to. But this is maybe after. So, but still, things same. At all tunes that you have to learn from that way, soldier or a record.
Yeah. Did you start writing them down, or they just become memorized immediately yourself?
One time I used to write at everything. I remember I had quite a lot of stangueses around a long time ago, or like those are the 78, record. So I said, but most of the time, much later, I just play a number of them. Still, since from I got very much into Bud Powell, and after that, I think it was just play his record, and I just learned how to play, just that. And by that time, I had my little piano. So that's. It's mostly that, I guess it's mostly memorized later on. First, early days, I used to copy it and put it on the paper.
Yeah. You came to Berkeley in '56,
yes,
was it?
Yeah.
This concept of going to school to learn jazz, was that a revelation? Was that?
Not really. Actually, what brought me here and to States is that I became more and more big frog in a little pond, And as I mentioned earlier, that if you can play, you had a job. Still to the point where even though 54, 55, still there's enough job, and I could almost say, if I started to play saxophone then, if I could just play a little bit, I probably got a job as a saxophone player. But so is there no reason for musicians to become better at it?
Yeah, you weren't challenged at all.
Yes, and the only things you become better at it because you want to become better at it.
Yeah.
You want to become a little more better than what you were doing before. So there are few self-motivated musicians. I'm not only, but very few.
Yeah.
So I was a very big, as I said, frog in a little pond. But I knew there's so many things that I can improve on, but I could not do in Japan because everybody came to a point where it wasn't better than I. They weren't better than I. It was, for example, like everybody asked about the Sadao Watanabe, who is a big name. So, and they didn't realize that when he came to my group, he was only 17, turned 18, and I have to show him a lot of things. So you become in that position. I don't really think it's a good position to be in if you are not quite that great yet. In my case, it certainly wasn't great yet. I had so many things that I have to improve upon. But jazz is, as you know, is a very unique art that you can't learn on a studio. You have to play with the others. I think is surrounding is better than you, and you get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't happening in Japan. So I really wanted to come to the United States, and those days was very difficult.
Yeah.
You can only you can only come student visa, what they call F visa form, or
What's it called?
F, form F.
Okay.
Yes, that school has to prove and that this person, and the school has to have that qualification. Not every little private school could do.
Ah.
So things like that. And there was a guitar player from Boston. He wasn't drafted, and he told me about this school. In those days, it's called Berkeley School of Music, and before that, it used to be called Sitting House. And I knew about the book. A lot of so noted, like Gershwin, for example.
Yeah.
They studied with Joseph Schillinger.
Oh, yes.
Food. So that's what they were teaching. And I thought, well, he suggested that I should write letter. Meanwhile, I had a record out from Verve, Norman Granz, and when I wrote the letter to school that my wish to be accepted in a school, and the Norman Granz has written big article about me simultaneously with his releasing my record. It was a 10-inch in those days, and the school noticed that, so they decided that would be. It's a very small school that time, so I think it works better for both of us. They gave me full scholarship. Yeah. School got a lot of publicity because of that too. So that's how I came to school in Boston, and then I started playing from third month. I came January '56. I started playing at Storyville in March. So that was a big. But I think one thing school did for me is perhaps filing cabinet. That's a funny way of saying it. I knew just about almost things that they was teaching as far as arranging and that sort of concern. Schillinger system, this is something else. I think I got quite a lot out of it, even though it's not applicable directly to writing, but still they broaden your scope, so to speak. But I was doing everything before that. I was arranging, and I had a Nanette, a regular radio broadcast in Japan. So I had to write for Nanette. And so I was doing all this, but I was doing all this by my experience as going through sort of like a trial and error, so to speak. So school has, let's say, I could analyze what I did. It was like, say, if my mind, my brain, and the inside the brain, maybe like a file, and put it in a perspective, so to speak. Yeah. That I think I think school did that for me.
I like that. Was that the first stop at Berkeley? Let me rephrase. When was the first chance you had to write for a whole big band?
Oh, probably about second year. They had a concert, and school asked me to write a chart for concert. I have written 3 movement piece. I don't really think, well, the second movement was with a string, first movement is a straight, the third movement has a timpani and all that sort of things. I'm not quite sure if it was good or not, and perhaps wasn't.
Was it your own composition too?
Yeah. So
well, you jumped right into it, didn't you?
I don't know.
Instead of
no.
Instead of just writing maybe a fairly straight-ahead blues chart.
No, I
you
think,
did your own thing.
Yeah, I think at that point I had 10 years before that. Before I came to this country, I had 10 years of my career in Japan. and I was doing pretty okay. I got the point where I was just playing probably faster than anybody, longer than anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
That sort of thing. But big band, it was something that I wasn't quite interested in. I was interested in an individual player. I was mainly, and more than anything, I was interested in my piano playing to be improved a little more. You know,
Yeah.
I thought I could. I always thought I could a little more improve. I could a little bit more improve. So that was because school requested. That's why I wrote. But that never was my ambition. It wasn't at all. I became interested in writing as much later. Perhaps 67, around there. It's actually 67, I had my own concert, my own produced, try to get money for work and so on, blah, 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 at the town hall. And that time I thought, I was hoping that if some people would notice me, and so I had a solo and trio and about 4 big band shots. And when I was rehearsing that, I felt that's what I wanted to do. I felt like that's what I wanted to do, because after that point, I was getting a little bit anxiety about the fact that it's, you know, as you know, I had a quartet one time with this Mariano, so, but it wasn't enough color for me. I thought I needed more color. And so I had this anxiety. I couldn't fully express my thought, so to speak. So when I did that, I felt like, oh, that's what I like to do. I think that's where I feel very comfortable.
Yeah.
One thing about, I always played, and I always said afterwards, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. And while I'm playing, I said, oh, I did it again. I don't think I would have said, oh my God, I did it again, and all of this. So writing is something that you can take your time. You can, if you don't like it, you can change, so on, so on. So I think that's maybe one of the part of it. And I know if I were paint, I probably needed a lot of color. I think that's probably it. But I couldn't really I didn't have the money to, so like a rehearsal band, so to speak. Till 1972, we moved to, because of Lou's job with the Tonight Show, moved to Los Angeles, and out from boredom, he remembered I had 4 charts. So he suggested he would get the musician together, and we rehearse every Wednesday morning from 10:15. It's 50 cents, and the union had a rehearsal, and still do. I think it's $5 now, but those days, 50 cents for 2 hours and 2.5 hours, something like that.
Oh.
So that's how it started, and the people wanted to hear, and so on and so on. But I never wanted, I still don't, as a rule, I'm not interested in big band.
That's an interesting statement. I mean, you certainly made an impact and kept that tradition alive. You know, when you read about your music, most people mention that it brings in a whole other area of influence from your native culture. When you write, do you consciously try to think of things from your youth that are now combined with American jazz, or is it just kind of part of you?
No, it's actually, I never thought about it till Duke Ellington died. Before that, you know, it was just a Japanese traditional concept of being Japanese playing jazz was some sort of a handicap. When I was growing up in Japan as a player, they always said Filipino people have better feeling than Japanese. And indeed, those the Filipino player plays better than us. And it's simply because they have a longer history. They were under the colonized by America. So they are more exposed to jazz, much longer than we were. So I think that's, it has to be. Today no one say that anymore, you know, but that. So when I was in Japan, when the critic would compliment to me, and the phrases they used to use, or her place, smell of butter. That smell of butter. Smell of butter, I mean, it's very American, because the butter is Western. Japanese is traditionally food, we have no butter.
Okay.
So,
What an interesting
yeah,
thing.
so they used to say, well, her place is the smell of butter. That's what they used to say. So that, it's been going on for a long time. When the Duke Ellington died, I believe it was 73, we moved there, 76, 74, I think, isn't it?
I think you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a Village Voice, Nat Hentoff has a memoir, and it was talking about the fact Duke was how proud he was about his race. And he was saying, pointing out so many music was based on his race, which, I mean, I knew some, but I never thought it that way till somebody pointing out, like say, Black Butterfly, perhaps Black and Tan, you know, fantasy, what have you.
Right.
So that's what actually triggered me. I think everything when you do and is sort of enlighten your, that time come because everything else is something developing underneath. And it's almost like a volcano, and it's something trigger that become. You know, I think my case was Duke Ellington's that memoir. They are written by Nat Hentoff. And I thought that's what I should. I should look into my heritage before, because one, I have long career as a jazz player, and I came very good time in this country where no one cares, no club owner was care if you pack me or not. You do the routine circuit, jazz club circuit. Even, for example, even the greatest classic Miles Davis's quintet, like a Red Garland, Philly Joe, Coltrane, him, Paul Chambers, the people did not come. I mean, the story, but they come, and they only, weekend was the only time. It's most weeknights, it's not that many people were there. Those are the time, but club wasn't so uptight about that. So I caught tail end of that. So I went through also the great player like Oscar Pettiford was living, and he used to come to Hickory House when I was playing summertime, almost every night sitting in, meaning he didn't have a job. You know, in those days, so if you, I feel very bad for him, but at the same time, those was the day that the people didn't have a job, much job, and they were great and player, and it was a music, jazz music business. It wasn't quite so organized or productionized as today. They was very open, so I could sit in with the Max's group if I know the tune, which I did, and things like that. That was my very valuable asset. And all that, I think, that is the, I think, is the basic foundation of my writing. So my long years of playing and timing was right for me to come to this country to be able to play with this player. That was the most valuable lesson you could possibly get. I think is my asset. Not everybody can have. And so I sort of well, I had a long career and as a jazz player. But I have a different heritage. And always, I never even thought about looking into my heritage. But because of that article, I thought I would look into it. I have a different heritage than American players. and I should try to draw from that. Perhaps I can make it a little bit different. As you know, jazz history, music history, did not include Oriental influence. So it's, at least I can infuse something makes it a little bit different. And perhaps I can return something to jazz community or history that hasn't been pretty good to me. Although people always said, you know, I'm barely paying rent for about 13 years. And the people always say, oh, you have a terrible time, difficult time. And I never thought I'm having a difficult time, because it was, that's everybody else did, I thought.
Yeah.
So, but when I look back, I think the time was a very important time. If I didn't have that, I probably didn't come to that conclusion. I think is having a sort of like a, you know, to not above, but to be warm, you become more warm. And it's very difficult. I'm not a literally informed person. You know, like say, there's a certain animal, they go sleep in the wintertime, but they go hibernate. But it's not a really a hibernation, but there's a time when you are, and then you accumulate a lot of thought. I think a lot of things you accumulate. And that was my 13 years, I think. And that, so I think was a very important time for me, those.
Yeah.
So I think everything works the way it should be.
Yeah. That's fascinating, really. Was it a challenge then to, you started delving into Oriental music and themes and so forth, to transfer that to this big band format?
Yeah, I think first of all, excuse me.
Sure.
I think I would like to think my big band is a real stripped down to small. I think it's an extension of a small group. You know, that's what I like to think. But there's many things happen because of the very first band, what they could do, so on, so on. I utilize it, blah 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 blah. Yeah. But when I, as I say before, I decided at least I should try that. I was very fascinated by Japanese drum called Suzumi, which is my late father was a student of NOH, Men's Performing Art. He was a student of NOH, and it was very familiar to me. And this is two-man works, but they have such a beautiful sound, and two-headed drums and then tied with a string and play like this, another one play like that. This one is bigger, it's make a higher pitch. The one is small one, this makes a lower sound pitch, a little more resonant. And you change with a squeeze string also, you change the pitch with, there's a certain Japanese paper. You keep putting into the change pitch, you know, the way you like. That's what they do. But I was very fascinated with that. I always wanted to utilize that. So that was the one, as Kogan was the first one, that was 1974. But I always think it's just enough to make it effective, but it's not going to be major takeover, something like Brazilian music that became sort of a major things in the jazz scene, but it's like there's things called like a samba jazz or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it will never become that way, but a little different. And also, the few things when I was in Mingus, he used to bend the note, which is very much Oriental. And I don't think he did it purposely, but when I was at his group, we rehearsed without anything. He would sing, and you kind of have to imitate it. So he sang, and then a saxophone player and trumpet player have to imitate, you know, what he sings. So I think that's the best way to learn music, I think. But so there was some of the music was like a little, like a bended, so a certain way. And I think that's also was very common Japanese music. Many notes are bended. The artistry of Japanese instrument music is, it's not a scale so much, but change the shade of one note. That's the artistry. And that includes bending a note also, so on, so on. So I think it become more like a color, a little bit different, I think, something.
Did you have to use some different kinds of notation to get those kinds of effects out of the saxophones and the trumpets?
No, well, you know what I do? I just write a slide. I said, play sticky.
Play
and then
sticky.
the people say, what does that mean? Sticky, what does that mean? It's funny though. See, when I grew up in Japan in a big band, in those days, like, it was everything was go like this, you know.
Yeah.
You won't go whap, but you have a plus and an open and a close. That's the way. And it was, I'm very sensitive about the long and the short. A drum, for example, drum plays, so I have, and then also did that one, and then as just a staccato.
Yes.
That's different to me. This must have bottom. Staccato doesn't have to have a bottom, but to me. So jazz is the main thing. I think the big band is the most important thing to me. It is that it must have a bottom. A lot of times, I think that depends on, so you very rely on the rhythm section. If the rhythm section doesn't have a bottom, it's kind of hard to do. But, you know, all musicians used to say heavy bottom.
Yeah.
That's it.
I wanted to play just, I don't know, about 12 measures
Yes.
of something here. First of all, I have to say it's pretty challenging music.
You know, I never have written to make it difficult, but because my music as a foundation is bebop music, because that's how I grew up. So bebop music, as you know, it's a virtuoso music. It became a virtuoso music after bebop. So consequently, there are a lot of notes. And consequently, it's difficult.
Yeah.
But I think it's like a long time ago, some classical musician said, the music has no difficulty, easy, but good and bad. So that sometimes music come out difficult, sometimes easy, but doesn't matter. It's because most of the time, I think classical field, they don't really say that. And sometimes I think consider as a challenge. If the pianist can play, let's say, Rachmaninoff's Concerto 3 or something like that, and they consider as like a real technician, something like that. But they consider as challenging. They will not ever, at least in my experience, they say, how come damn so hard? You know, they don't say that. As for jazz, somehow people say that. You know, I heard a long time ago somebody criticized my music. This was like over 15 years ago. Yeah. He said, how come her music sounds so hard? So Lou said, well, hard yesterday, okay, today, easy tomorrow. So I think that's why it's tend to be difficult. But it's a two to tango. You know, the musician is a good musician. I like to think they like challenging music.
Absolutely.
They were not, men, I shouldn't say men, but a human being, artists, men and women, both of them. We don't live bread alone. So I think it's challenging music is something that they would like to challenge.
Well, most of them
I think.
in LA, a lot of the fellows and the women were working studio jobs and so forth, so they must have really relished this opportunity.
I think it's a Los Angeles band, which is the first band. It was a very important in a many different ways, but one thing it was that because of the saxophone player, all of them doubled because most of them were studio players. So because they double, I utilized that,
Yeah.
and that became a trademark of my writing. So everything is sort of like a both way. If they didn't double, I wouldn't have it written. So and it's a long time ago when I was in Japan. I heard somebody's music, it's a woodwind, maybe stream or something. It was sort of fashion, and I heard. But to me, that wasn't jazz. And then I said, if I were written a woodwind, I would not write like that. So that was the opportunity for me to write. And so as the first band, it was a very important band. Also, the first band was very important for me because I never doubted so many musicians in my life. It's always, after I came to this country, trio or quartet, and no more than that. So it was a totally different story with so many musicians. You have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And pianists tend to be, at least I am, tend to be paranoia. And it took me a long time to get over, to take everything personally.
Oh.
And so I grew up as a human being with the first band. I think so that was a very important band. Yeah.
Not only musically,
Yes.
but in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So,
It must have been a struggle just economically and logistically for that many people, to get them to rehearsals. I mean,
well, everyone came to rehearsal because they like it. No one got paid.
Yeah.
Still don't today. We do rehearsal regulatory basis, but no one pay. In New York, you pay your own subway token, what have you. And Los Angeles, the same. Everybody came to rehearse. On Wednesday morning, that was something for them to do. And later on, when the people said, well, once I would like to have a band to have a concert here, and I was so inexperienced, so I will book a hotel that is more than I was payroll. So they were like, musicians will lose money.
oh my.
We all, things like that. It was really a disaster. It's been a long time because I had to do everything. It was just airplane, still is, but airplane arrangement, hotel arrangement, bus arrangement. So there was, it's a learning process for me. And then, I think it's the first band paid a lot of due.
You made a statement in, I think it was the liner notes to this particular CD, that you feel very strongly that leaving behind your own compositions is even more important than your own recordings, that this is kind of a legacy for you.
Well,
Did I interpret that statement okay? It sounded like it was very important for you as a person to be leaving original work.
Yes, I think so. I think I always said, first of all, earlier I made a statement, the fact that I think I needed more color to express the writing and playing and writing is, to me, it was the same. And I used to write for my playing, and it wasn't enough to express myself thoroughly. It wasn't just playing a figure, playing a nice bebop figure. It wasn't that. It was something more towards to attitude, you will, if you will, or philosophical view, if you will. There's a certain things you think about, so on. That became very important for me. Then that's why I think I needed more color. When I start doing this, people start pay attention. Before that, you know, I was good enough that it was offer me a job. People offer me a job, but I really never made any revolution, so to speak. Oscar Peterson, they developed this called Oscar Peterson style. Somewhere from Canada. George Shearing came from England, and there was a Shearing style. One time, early 50 was like everybody played like that. So what did I do? Toshiko style piano. I haven't, you know, I didn't make any revolution. So I really felt like a sort of insignificant. Since I start writing, people seems to pay attention. They seems to hear something new, something wasn't there before, and so on. So I have to say, my value lies as a writer, as a musician. And when I started writing, because it was so many years, just like any other musician, you know, my record became quickly collector's items. So I was very used to that. I used to not selling anything. So it was the first one. It was a big seller. Actually, I was very surprised. So this was a year later of our first recording after we start rehearsing every Wednesday. And I was basically saying, I mean, I say the same thing now too, but I've been lucky that I can actually witness my sort of success, so that I don't have to worry about paying a rent and things like that. I'm very lucky. But I think even in that, I think it's a true, I don't know how to say it in English, let me see, judgment, final judgment, it has to be after my death. That's what I think. So it was very, especially those days, it's more important because I didn't, it's still equally important now, but that time it's very important because I never had any success.
Right.
So
you definitely found your your niche here, I guess.
Yes, but when I was writing and the band was getting sort of recognition, at the same time the other writer, reviewer will put me down for something that I consider it wasn't fair, but it doesn't matter, you know, whatever it was. So, or people would say, are you sure Lou didn't help you out? Or, you know, there was the first RCA, the first one came out Long Yellow Road. The press release went with the recording. I saw from Leonard Feather showed it to me. He could not believe it. And he said, Lou write all arrangements.
Oh, dear.
So all these things, it was happening, and it was sometimes some critics say, I question her authenticity. So all this, so I think those comes with it. If you're doing something people think is something new is happening, whatever it is. And then also my heritage. If I was standing on the street, no one knows me. And I said to them, I said, I'm a jazz player. And everybody said, oh, funny, she doesn't look like a jazz player.
Yes.
So there are many things unnatural about what I'm doing. Doesn't fit together. So I think those things comes with it. And I will be lying if I say it doesn't bother me. It does bother me to some degree, but it really, in bottom line, is it doesn't bother me. I think it's, as I said, if the music is good enough, it's going to leave it behind my death. So
right, it's going to override all those.
I hope so.
People who. Sometimes it seems like the critics have to have a certain amount of negative things to say.
Otherwise,
So, gee,
it's not a review.
Yeah, it's like giving out parking tickets. I haven't given out parking tickets today. I better find some more.
So,
Well, and you came back to New York from L.A. in what year?
83.
Uh-huh.
Actually, 82 November. We started New York band, present band, in 83 March, I believe. So.
See some great players on your records.
Oh yes. Also interesting to me the fact that when the first band was 10 years, it was the first band was with, and then there was somebody was like let's say 23 years old. It was 33 years old, and now the present band is this is the 16th year, and so when they were mid-20, they're 40 now. So we all kind of grow together, and then I can, like just a little taste of history, like the Duke had like a 36-40.
Yeah. That's right.
And I taste a little of that.
That's nice.
Little, yes.
That's nice,
Yeah.
and you can personalize the music maybe to some of the players.
Yes.
Wow.
So.
Just a couple more things. When you first conceive of a new piece, let's suppose you get a commission or you have a reason to really write something new. Where does it start? Do you sit at the piano or?
Actually, as you know, some of I consider as important pieces are programmatic music.
Yes.
I think that's what it's called. As like could be ballet. So it's a story to tell.
Okay.
And some of the things I like to tell the story, for example, existence of a courtesan in Edo era, Japanese courtesan in Edo era. It's very unique. Or mercury poison at Minamata. There's a certain story like I like to tell. I go by, see, writer is the first listener. So I, as a listener, when I finish listening to this particular piece, I like to feel this way. As a writer, I want to give a listener feel that way. It's the certain things that has to convey. It's not an intellectual, but certain emotional feeling it must receive from that particular piece. So for that, what the notes you will choose. So it's a long process. I go from a backwards to, and then after maybe I think I have the certain structure, melodical structure or something. I went to piano, I go. Then I sit on the next day, and then the next day, see if that's still good. A lot of time it's not.
Didn't hold up for the next.
But sometimes easy to come, sometimes it's difficult to come. It's really hard to tell, but sometimes it comes very easy, sometimes very difficult. But by my experience, if I just hang in there, I know I will come up with something. So I don't give up.
Well, this has just been a fascinating conversation. I hope that that the band stays together, and
I hope so too.
You know,
yeah.
I know it must be, with all those people, a difficult proposition to keep a core of.
Yes, as a band like mine, it can't exist without the musician. Every musician wants to belong to band, wants to play this music. Other than that, it cannot exist because it's very little monetary reward.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think I'm very lucky. Also, musician likes to gather with a good musician. That's another thing. So.
Your husband told me that it's kind of a difficult proposition to take your place in the band.
Oh, that's not quite true.
Well, he doesn't feel like he's a good leader, and plus he said that there's no piano parts.
No piano parts, because I think the big band is somewhat like a chamber music. It's that much. It's only about 16, 17 people. Now, chamber music, you don't really need a piano unless it's written specially for piano or that play the part in certain position. I have a couple of tunes like that, but other than that, you don't really need a piano.
Yeah.
Especially though the Supremo player, I think he's one of the truly great players. He also very dedicated. I always say, I can't afford him if I want to marry him. I probably have to sell a house.
He wouldn't be in the band if I wasn't married to him.
But he's only enjoy playing the band because he is the principal soloist. He get to play a lot. Most of big band,
Right.
that's not the case. But he doesn't need a piano. He is the last person to need a piano. But some other people might need a piano.
Okay.
But get used to it. Also, I have a little over 80 piece of music. So he can choose from that to not being too noticed. When I write for him, I really, for example, for saxophone, tenor, I think about like a low note, so he has such a beautiful low note, which is not every tenor player has. Yeah. And I like to utilize that, especially in a ballad or something like that. So in the flute case, I don't have too much problem. But the very first one, Kogun, I had to ask him, could you do this? I write and then could you do that? Because there was a lot of bending. And because there was a whole French model, I think they were able to do, and he's a supremo in that way. Point is, some of the music, like a ballad I have written, especially something like a Repose of Four Seasons, I have a feeling, this is my romantic idea, he dies sometimes. I mean, everybody dies sometimes. I don't think anybody will be able to play. And it was a tune would die with him.
Oh.
I think that's, sounds very romantic, I know,
Yes.
but that's the way I feel.
Okay.
And that's, I think, beauty of jazz.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful sentiment.
Thank
And
you.
I really appreciate you joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. I had a great time talking.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and best of success to you. And
Thank you.
I hope the charts keep flowing.
Not flowing, but I hope to be able to come up with
Right.
something. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.